X-Day, as the Germans called the start of Hitler's long-anticipated offensive in the West, had been set on the 1st of May for 5 days' time. 4 days later, he postponed it until the 7th of May. And then, finally, at the request of Feldmarschall Goering, his deputy and the commander of the Luftwaffe, he postponed it again for a further 3 days. But that would be it. No more postponements. The fateful hour would be dawn on Friday the 10th of May. Now, as Hitler walked the expanse of his study, dictating to his secretary, there was less than 18 hours to go. By the next morning, his air fleets would be raining bombs over the Low Countries, his armies marching forward, punching their way through Luxembourg, Holland, and Belgium. The battle which begins today, he concluded in his proclamation, will decide the fate of the German nation for the next 1,000 years. Now, do your duty. It was Hitler's way to describe decisions as unavoidable do-or-die choices. His view of life was largely black or white, with few shades of grey. This also justified his gambler's approach. Yet, in this case, he really did have no choice. He had thought Britain and France were bluffing with their threats to uphold Poland's independence, that they were mere words. After all, they had stood by and watched when he moved back into the Rhineland, again during the Anschluss of Austria, and then once again during his occupation of both the Sudetenland and then the rest of Czechoslovakia. Why should Poland be any different? It was Britain who had declared war first, on the morning of Sunday, the 3rd of September. When Hitler heard the news, he had sat immobile, gazing blankly before him. Eventually, he turned to his foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, and with a savage look asked, "What now?" In the days that followed, he had time to answer that question for himself. It soon became clear that neither Britain nor France had any intention of going on the offensive, at least not for the time being. That meant he would have to strike first. He had always known that at some point he would have to deal with the Western powers, and Britain in particular. He had nothing but contempt for the French, but he did admire the British and their empire. Yet although he had gambled on her not declaring war over Poland, he had recognized that Britain would need subduing before he could continue with his expansion program. The need for living space, Lebensraum, lay at the heart of his plans for the Third Reich. Thus, Britain was the most dangerous enemy. Our enemy number one, Hitler told Speer, as early as 1937. It was Britain that had led the talks at Munich back in September 1938, and it was Britain that had been most vocal in her protestations against the German absorption of Czechoslovakia in March 1939. From that time onwards, right up until the outbreak of war, it had been Britain, more so than France, that had continued to denounce Hitler's plans. Britain that had first threatened to uphold Poland's independence. England is our enemy, Hitler had told his Minister for Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, and a showdown with England is a matter of life and death.